Tonight's shir, we're continuing where we left off in Sichos HaRan. We're up to paragraph Reish Samach 260. In the previous paragraph, the last item that we had, Rabbi Arizal spoke about the topic of tzimoin, thirst, and specifically in terms of thirsting for Hashem, a person having very intense yearning and desire to come close to Hashem. This paragraph that we're up to now, Reish Samach, continues a little bit on that subject. Rav Nosson writes that Rabbi Arizal spoke with me and he made a very big deal, a very major issue about a person's yearning and desire for doing a mitzvah or doing any davar shebikdusha, any good deed, any holy item, even when the person doesn't succeed in carrying it out. There are a lot of times that people, human beings, have an attitude towards each other that if a person says, I tried to do a certain item for you, and the other person's answer is a penny for your efforts. You tried, but you didn't do it, but I didn't get it. So what does it help me that you tried? No matter how hard you want to say you tried. We see that the Torah says that when it comes to Hashem, who is perfect, and who is the epitome, the only symbol of perfection that exists, and yet Hashem with His perfection says that when a person puts in a sincere effort to try to do something, or even if a person simply wants very much to do good, there's a lot of credit that's given just for that. And Rav Nosson says that Rabbi Arizal pointed out a proof to this from a law in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim, chapter 62, discusses, in a discussion about the laws of Kriya Shema, the Shulchan Aruch says that there are certain cases where a person could find themselves in a place where they're not permitted to recite a posek in the Torah. Now the question is, if a person finds themselves, Rachmana litzlan, in cases where Jews were in prison, and the conditions in the prison were such that there was such impurity, such filth, that a person wasn't able to recite a posek of Shema in such a place. And yet we know that the mitzvah of reciting the Kriya Shema in the morning and at night is a mitzvah d'oraisa, b'shach b'chov kumecha. The question is, what is a person expected to do in such a case? And here the halacha says that what the person should do is yaharher b'liboy. The person should think it in his heart. Should think what in his heart? The words of the Shema. Should think Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, simply not recite the words but think it? The answer is no. That's not what the halacha is referring to here. The Mogan Avram and the Prisha explain that what's meant here is that what the person should do is they should think in their heart that I want to say the Shema. This should be their exact thoughts. I want to say the Shema, but I can't. And the person should be mitztayer over it. The person should feel bad about the fact that they would like to say the Shema, but they can't. V'hu mekabel schar al zeh. And the halacha is that the person gets credit for the mitzvah of Shema in that way. Whether it's exactly the same credit as another person who did say the Shema in a place of purity or not, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't discuss that, but it does say that this person is mekayim the mitzvah of saying Shema, even though they didn't say it at all whatsoever. It didn't come out of their mouth. He simply thought, this thought, I would like to say it, I can't, and I feel bad about that. That's registered as credit for a mitzvah. And Rav Nosson says that we see clear proof from this that yearning to do a mitzvah and feeling bad about not having achieved it is something that's also very precious to Hashem, and a person receives reward for that. Naturally, it's understood that a person has to do this within certain boundaries. In terms of how often you use this, there's a person who could try to take advantage of this and use this as an excuse not to do any mitzvah, because I can't. and a person will simply try to get around all the mitzvahs by assuming that they can't, and they'll try to look for an easy way out. That's not what the halacha is referring to here on one hand. And on the other hand, when we talk about being mitztayer, a person feeling bad, naturally we don't chas v'shalom mean a case where a person feels bad enough to get depressed. We know that term, that's a dirty word in Judaism, for a person chas v'shalom to allow themselves to fall into that frame of mind. When we talk about being mitztayer over not being able to do a mitzvah, we mean a person feeling this intense yearning, I wish I could do it, and trying to arouse a love for Hashem and a respect for Hashem that would really make me want to do this with all the effort I possibly could expend. The next item that's presented in Sichos HaRan, paragraph Reish Samach Aleph 261, is a little bit unusual in terms of the style of this sefer. In general, this sefer, Sichos HaRan, is generally made up of short paragraphs of statements that Rabbi Arizal made, either while traveling with his students, in other words, in an informal context, in a type of mini shir that was given at unexpected times. And because of the fact that Rabbi Arizal was zeicha to have a student that was as serious about learning and as respectful for his rabbi as Rav Nosson Zal, who knew that any moment that he had to be able to spend with his rabbi, he could definitely positively assume that if his Rebbe would speak to him, what he would be saying would be worthy of being written down, of documenting. This Talmud made sure to have a pen and paper with him at all times and caught 99.9% of everything his Rebbe told him on paper and wrote it down. And from this we have this sefer Sichos HaRan, which presents an incredible wealth of knowledge and advice regarding many situations. The next item that's presented here, it appears, was written down as a shir that Rabbi Arizal gave on a Shabbos Chanukah. And it seems that the shir was a difficult shir, and it was written down in the form of short notes. And it wasn't written down by Rav Nosson Zal himself, but rather Rav Nosson Zal says that I found these notes of one of my colleagues, one of Rabbi Arizal's Talmidim, and it wasn't really written down in a neat order and properly in a way that could easily be understood as a shir. However, whatever I was able to extract from it that could be helpful in terms of advice in serving Hashem, that's what I'm going to present now in this paragraph. Now we're going to try to go through this a little bit slowly. There's going to be about 20 items presented here. Each one of the 20 is connected, number one, to the item in front of it, and it forms a total package. Rabbi Arizal here is going to be discussing Shabbos, number one, certain items that Shabbos could help a person accomplish. For example, that the mitzvah of Shmiras Shabbos, showing the proper love and respect for Shabbos, that mitzvah is mesugel for a person being zeicha to have true modesty. That could open a person's eyes to really see and understand their own shortcomings and to be able to see the greatness of Hashem, number one. And number two, also, Rabbi Arizal is going to show the connection between that and the concept of Ner Chanukah, the oil that's used in performing the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. Let's try to go through this slowly. If a person will pay attention, I don't think they should have any problem understanding and digesting each piece of what we're going to present now. Rabbi Arizal begins quoting the opening posek in Parshas Vayeshev, which is the reading of Shabbos Chanukah. Usually on Shabbos Chanukah, we end up reading one of two parshas in the Torah, Vayeshev or Miketz. Parshas Vayeshev begins with the words, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei oviv be'eretz Canaan. Yaakov Avinu lived in the neighborhood of his father, Yitzchak Avinu, be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. We see here the Torah is making a connection between Yaakov Avinu and Yitzchak Avinu and the place called Canaan. Eile toildos Yaakov Yosef. And the next pasuk says that in terms of the main produce that came forth from Yaakov Avinu, the most important child to come forth from Yaakov Avinu, it was Yosef HaTzadik. These are the opening psukim of Parshas Vayeshev. Now Rabbi Arizal begins. There is a posek in Tehillim where the posek says, Ragli omdo b'mishor, my foot is standing in a solid place, b'makelim avorech Hashem, and therefore I'm able to bless Hashem publicly in a crowd. Because my foot is standing in a solid place, I'm able to bless Hashem publicly. Rabbi Arizal now begins to explain each item that's presented in this pasuk. The foot. What does the foot represent in Yiddishkeit? The foot represents emunah, faith in Hashem. Because the foot is what supports the whole rest of the body. That's the foundation on which the whole body is standing. Just as we know that all the qualities of a Jew and all the mitzvahs of the Torah stand on one foundation. The foundation of it all is emunah, faith in Hashem. There's a pasuk in Tehillim where the pasuk says, Kol mitzvaysecha emunah, that all the mitzvahs are based on faith in Hashem, belief in Hashem. And also there's the Gemara in Makis, where the Gemara says that different rabbis attempted to summarize the Torah, to present a shortened version, a monarch notes, or an abridged version of the Torah for their Talmidim, to give them the most condensed version of the Torah. And the Gemara shows how in the Sefer Tehillim there is a certain chapter which presents 11 basics of Yiddishkeit. And those 11 sort of summarize the entire Torah, all 613 mitzvahs. The Gemara says, as a final statement on this discussion, that one of the Nevi'im, one of the prophets, Chavaku Kanovi, came along, vehe'emidon al achas, and he was able to show how the entire Torah is based on one principle. There's one item that could be considered a comprehensive aspect of the whole Torah. What is it? Emunah, faith. And he proved this from a posek. There's a posek that says, V'tzadik be'emunasoi yichye. A tzadik lives with his faith, implying that even if a person had only emunah, that's enough to classify him as a tzadik. So we see that emunah is koilel everything. It represents 100%. A person could have emunah and score 100%. He could be classified as a tzadik. So therefore, we see that the wording in the Gemara, Bo Chavakuk vehe'emidon alachas, Chavakuk came along and he showed that the whole Torah is standing on one principle, standing on one. That term is used about standing on one leg. So we see that emunah represents the leg, the feet. Rabbi Arizal says that a Jew has to see to it that their emunah should be pure, without being confused in any way. The emunah should be smooth and solid. It should not have any confusion in it. The Hebrew word for confusion is irvuv, and Rabbi Arizal says it should not be bechinas erev. The emunah should also not be a concept of darkness or night. We know that there's a pasuk in Eicha, and the posek is Chadoshim labikorim Rabba emunasecho, that a person is refreshed in the morning. Every morning a person feels refreshed through a new injection of emunah. We see in this posek that the Torah makes a clear association between emunah, faith in Hashem, and morning, light. So Rabbi Arizal says a person has to see to it that their emunah, their faith in Hashem, should be clear. It shouldn't have any psoilus in it. It shouldn't have anything else mixed into it. It shouldn't be blurry at all. And when a person is zoche to this type of pure faith, this emunah, serves as a tzinoir, as a pipe for all the hashpois and all the brachos. When Hashem wants to give a person things that they need and different types of bracha, the pipe into which brachos are placed is emunah. As the posek says, ish emunais, rav brachos, that a person who's zoche to have faith has plentiful blessings from Hashem. However, if a person's emunah is deficient, it's defective, then what happens is, rather than the person receiving all of these brachos that they should be getting from Hashem, instead the brachos are distributed to the klipos, to sources of tumah, to the nations of the world. Just as the Gemara says that the proper way is for Hashem to distribute all the shefa to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is the place that's shoyset chila, that receives first from Hashem, and then whatever's left over, whatever Hashem has left over in the pot, after He's fed Eretz Yisrael, the shirayim, the leftovers, go to the rest of the world. That's how it is when the Yidden are behaving properly. Why? Because Eretz Yisrael is the center of Emunah. Shchon Eretz Ure'ei Emunah. The Torah says Eretz Yisrael is a place where a person lives, a person learns to live by faith, by Emunah. So Eretz Yisrael is the place that receives the bracha first, and then all other places. When people are lacking in Emunah, when there's a pigam in Emunah, that's when this sequence is reversed. And instead of the bracha coming to the Yidden, instead it's given to the klipos, to the outsiders. And we know the posek says again, Soviv Rishoim Yishalochon, that the Rishoim, they surround the Kedusha, they encircle the Yidden, and they're sitting there waiting. Any time that the Yidden aren't deserving of getting what Hashem wants to give to them, automatically it falls into the outer perimeters. It falls to these Rishoim that are encircling the Yidden, which represent the klipos, the tumah. Now the question is, when a person has a chisoron in emunah, when a person feels weak in emunah in Hashem, what does this come from? Rabbi Arizal says that this comes from gadlus. This comes from a person having gaiva. Because the Gemara says, Mi sheyesh boi gasus, a person who has gaiva, Hashem says about that person, Ein ani v'hu yechoilun lodur. The world is not big enough for the two of us. Which means that Hashem separates Himself from that person. Hashem moves away from that person. When Hashem moves away from a person, that void, that vacuum, is automatically filled by kfiros, by atheism. In other words, there's a choice of one of two items. A person either believes in Hashem, or any chisoron in emunah. If a person has 99% faith in Hashem, where is that other 1% directed at? The 1% is directed towards avodah zarah, towards idol worship, towards kfira. The Baal Shem Tov says, we see this in a posek in the Kriya Shema, where the posek says, "V'sartem," you will turn away from Hashem, "Va'avadetem elokim acherim," and you will worship idols. The Baal Shem Tov translates this to mean that the slightest turn away from Hashem means automatically turning towards avodah zarah, towards kfiros. So that when a person chas v'shalom is lacking in emunah, automatically it means they're moving in on kfiros. And this item in particular, when a person has gaiva, this causes Hashem to move away from the person. If Hashem is moving away, obviously kfira, atheism, is moving in to replace it. So therefore, Rabbi Arizal says it's very important for a person's eyes to be opened up and to look with an eino pekicho, with a sharp eye, and to be able to see their own smallness, and to be able to recognize, lahavdil, the greatness of Hashem. And once a person can do that, if a person's eyes are open to see how small they are and how big Hashem is, automatically that person will be zeichet to avoid kfira. Rabbi Arizal says you should know that there is a mitzvah which opens the eyes of a person. There is a mitzvah that represents a major tikkun for the eyes of the person. That mitzvah is Shabbos. If a Jew is zeiche to show outstanding respect for Shabbos and to keep the Shabbos holy in every way, this mitzvah will serve as an eye-opener. Rabbi Arizal says the Zohar Kodesh tells us that the word Shabbos itself represents the eye. The word Shabbos, the Zohar Kodesh says, can be divided into two parts, Shin and Bat. we know that in Hebrew, the pupil of the eye, the small black dot in the center of the eye, is called bas ayin. That's the Hebrew word for it. Around the pupil of the eye, the Zohar HaKadosh says, there are generally 3 colored rings that surround the pupil of the eye. These are called the tlas gavnin de'ena, the 3 colors of the eye. So that in effect, the Zohar HaKadosh says that the eye is divided into 2 sections. 3 corresponding to the letter shin, which is 3 heads. The shin is composed of gimel roshin, 3 heads, 3 vovs coming together. And the word bas of Shabbos, the remaining letters based off, represent the pupil of the eye. So that Rabbi Arizal says, a Jew who is zoiche to keep Shabbos the right way, this mitzvah is mesugal to help a person open their eyes and really come to an understanding of what they are and what they're not. And if I'm not, the more that I come to the understanding of what I'm not, the more I come to the understanding of what Hashem is. The Torah tells us many times that a person who feels that I worked and I earned this and I did this, that person is automatically subtracting from what Hashem has done, from Hashem's accomplishments. The more a person comes to the realization that it's not I who did or I who accomplished, but rather Hashem gave this to me or Hashem helped me with this item, the more a person comes to the concept of true faith in Hashem. We find also, Rabbi Arizal mentions in another place, in another chapter in Likutei Moharan, that one of the instructions that were given to the Yidden in the Midbar about the mitzvah of Shabbos is, they were told, Shivu ish tachtov al yetzei ish mim koimoi. That on Shabbos, one of the mitzvahs is for a person to stay in his place, not to go out of his place. Each person has a certain tchum, a certain area that's considered to be his place regarding the laws of Shabbos, and a person is required to stay in that place, not to go out of there. Rabbi Arizal explains in Likutei Moharan that halacha is also marames, also hinting to this concept of modesty. A person not looking to present themselves as being bigger than they really are, meaning going outside of his own boundary. The concept of Ezeu Chacham Hamakiris Mekoimoi, knowing your place, knowing whether you deserve to sit up front, whether you deserve to be on top. That concept is also an inyan of anivus, understanding one's own shiflus. Now Rabbi Arizal says, because of the fact that Shabbos represents this eye-opener, and we said that when a person's eyes are opened, they can understand how small they really are, and they can thereby come to true faith in Hashem, so we see that Shabbos leads to emunah in Hashem. Therefore, Rabbi Arizal says, we could understand a statement that the Gemara makes in Masechta Shabbos. The Gemara says that if a person is zoiche to be shomer Shabbos ki hilchosoi, a person who keeps the mitzvahs of Shabbos the right way, afilu oived avodah zorah kidoir enosh moichalin loi. Even if this person was worshipping idols, like the generation of Enosh, where idol worship was extremely popular, even then, through keeping Shabbos the right way, he'll be forgiven for his sin. Why? Because we see that Shabbos is a mitzvah that helps a person be zeicha to come to faith in Hashem by opening one's eyes to their own madrega, recognizing the greatness of Hashem. That's how a person comes to emunah, which is the tikkun for all his avodah zarah. Even if he worshipped all kinds of avodah zarah, through Shmira Shabbos, all of that will be erased. His avodah zarah will be replaced with true faith in Hashem. Now Rabbi Arizal goes on to say that when a person has true faith in Hashem, that's the Mekoyer HaBracha, that's how a person is zeicha to receive all the blessings from Hashem, the chesed, the kindness of Hashem. So too, the Gemara says that when there's the opposite of emunah, when there's avodah zarah, idol worship, when there's kfira, atheism, the Gemara says that causes the anger of Hashem to be in the world. Kol zman sheyesh avodah zarah ba'olam, charoin af boilam. That brings the anger of Hashem into the world, and we know that the anger of Hashem is represented by Hashem's name Elokim. The name of Hashem Elokim represents midas hadin, harshness, and this corresponds to the dark side of the moon. We know that when we talk about the sun is always symbolic of the symbol of light. The sun is total light, and it's this huge ball of consistent light. Whereas the moon, the way it appears to us, there are times that it appears to be one large circle of light. There are times that it appears to be a half a circle of light, a half a circle of darkness, and there are times that it appears even to be totally dark. This concept of the Pegimas Halavona, the dark side of the moon, that corresponds to Hashem's name Elokim, which is the name of Hashem that reflects din, harshness. When Hashem turns his back on us, there are many psukim in the Torah that talk about Yo'er Hashem Ponov Eilecha, may Hashem face us and shine the light of his face upon us. When we talk about Hashem turning away from us, turning his back to us, that back represents darkness, midas hadin, harshness, Hashem's name Elokim. There's a posek which says, Ki shemesh umogen Hashem Elokim. Hashem Elokim, these are the two names of Hashem, one representing kindness and the other one representing harshness. These are compared to the shemesh, the sun, and the mogen, the shield of the sun. The moon is referred to as the mogen of the shemesh, because we know there are times when the moon eclipses the sun. It blocks out the light of the sun from being able to reach us. This is why the moon in this posek is referred to as the mogen, a shield of the sun. So that these two names, Yud Kei Vav Kei, corresponds to the shemesh, the light of the sun. Elokim represents this mogen, this shield, which is called the moon. The Gemara tells us in Psachim that while we're living in Olam Hazeh, in this world, Hashem is hidden in a sense, to the extent where we don't even call Hashem by his rightful name. We're not permitted to call Hashem by his real name. We're forced to use a nickname. The Gemara says we know that Hashem's real name is Yud Kei Vav Kei, as it's written. And yet in Olam Hazeh nowadays, we don't have permission to say that. When we speak about Hashem, we're required to use the nickname Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. The Gemara says, Lo Sid Lova, in the future, we're going to be Zocher that Hashem's name is going to be spoken the same way that it's written. Rabbi Arizal says, this corresponds to the difference that we see today between the light of the sun and the light of the moon. Today we know the sun to represent total light, whereas the moon, its light fluctuates from being light, but at its best, certainly being much smaller than the light of the sun, and at its worst, the moon becomes totally dark, total darkness. This concept of the sun and the moon corresponds to Hashem's name Yud Kei Vav Kei, as it's written. That represents the light of the sun, and Hashem's name Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, as it's pronounced, representing the light of the moon. That name represents the moon, Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, and Hashem's name Elokim also represents the light of the moon, this midas hadin, something that could be dark. La'osid Lova, in the future, there won't be these two concepts of light and darkness, kindness and harshness. Then there'll be total light, total kindness. The din will be taken over and botel to the chesed. The posek says that this is marumaz in the words Bayoim Hahu Yihiyeh Hashem Echod Ushmo Echod, that in the future Hashem's name will be one, Hashem will be one, and his name will be one. Meaning Hashem as it's written and the way that it's pronounced, both of these will be united. This yichud of Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim, when both of these become one, Hashem Echod Ushmo Echod, Rabbi Nachman says this will come about when people are zeicha to increase their emunah. The more a person is zeicha to improve their faith in Hashem, the more they'll bring about this time when Hashem and Elokim will become one. The light of the sun and the light of the moon will become equal. The moon will be elevated to match the light of the sun. We see this in many places in terms of this light of the sun and light of the moon becoming one, as we said earlier. Just as when it comes to emunah in Hashem, faith in Hashem, we said the key to being zeicha to emunah in Hashem is that a person's eyes have to be opened to see how small they are and how big Hashem is. So we see that the more light that there is, the more vision that there is, the more the emunah is strengthened. So too, when we talk about this yichud between Hashem and Elokim, it's also represented by this increased light, where the light of the moon will be increased to match the light of the sun. Therefore, Rabbi Arizal concludes that through a tikkun ha'emunah, by improving and being mashlim the emunah, this leads to this yichud of Yud Kei Vav Kei Elokim, the sun and the moon, being united, brought together. Now Rabbi Arizal goes back to explain the psukim that we started with. Rabbi Arizal says that Yaakov Avinu represents the sun. The Medrash Rabbah says that Yaakov Avinu's face, there are a few psukim that say that the face of Yaakov Avinu shone like the light of the sun. Shufrei de Yaakov ki shufrei dodam arishaim. It's brought that his face had a certain special light on it, and it shone with the brilliance of the face of Odam Arishain, who was the only one who was zeicha to be not created from flesh and blood, not born to a father and mother, but rather to be the Yitzir Kappa of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, handmade by Hashem. It's understood that because Odam Rishon was handmade by Hashem, his face had a much brighter light than any ordinary human being, and it's brought that the face of Yaakov Avinu shone like that also, and was compared to the sun. Yitzchak Avinu, on the other hand, Yitzchak Avinu we know is the symbol of din, harshness. The posek refers to him as Pachad Yitzchak. Yitzchak represents the one who is willing to serve Hashem with pain, with suffering, Akedas Yitzchak, willing to sacrifice for Hashem. So Yaakov Avinu represents Yud Kei Vav Kei, the concept of the sun, Chesed, light. Yitzchak Avinu represents the harshness, the darkness, the moon, the light of the moon relative to the sun. Rabbi Arizal says, this is why the posek says, Vayeshev Yaakov Be'eretz Megurei Oviv. There is a connection, there is a significance to bringing these two together. Yaakov Avinu, who represents the sun, Yitzchak Avinu representing the moon, and connecting these two, uniting these two. And how does this come about? Be'eretz Canaan. Where were these two joined together? Through Canaan. Rabbi Arizal says that the word Canaan is miloshain hachnoah. Hachnoah means humbleness. That through shiflus, through humbleness, which we said leads to a heightening of emunah, this is what brings about the yichud between the sun and the moon, between Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim. Then the pasuk goes on to say, immediately afterwards, Eile toildos Yaakov Yosef. You know what the greatness of Yaakov Avinu was? It was Yosef. Rabbi Arizal says that the word Yosef represents the mitzvah of Shabbos, because Shabbos is one of the few mitzvahs where we know there is a chiyuv of lahosif, to add on, that even though there are technical boundaries for Shabbos, that Shabbos begins when it's dark on Friday night, and it ends the moment darkness begins on Saturday night. We know there is a mitzvah to add to that, to begin Shabbos early, and to end Shabbos later than it's over technically. This is called Tosfos Shabbos. And Rabbi Arizal says this is what's hinted to here in the pasuk mentioning Yosef in conjunction with Yaakov and Yitzchak. That it's the mitzvah of Shabbos which has this concept of Yosef, Tosfos Shabbos. That's what opens one's eyes to see their own shiflus, this Canaan, this hachnoah, and that's what leads to the shleimus of emunah, which brings about the yichud between Yaakov and Yitzchak, the sun and the moon. This is why Rabbi Arizal says, the pasuk said earlier, Rakli omda b'mishor, that when my foot is standing in a solid place, when the emunah is the way it's supposed to be, b'makelim avorech Hashem, then I'll be able to bless not Elokim, but Yud-Kei Vav-Kei publicly. It means that the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei will be screamed out in public, implying that it won't be hidden. It won't be something that today could only be written. It can't be spoken. It can't be shouted out loud. But rather, when the Ragli Yomda B'Misha, when the Emunah will be Nistaken, that's when Yud-Kei Vav-Kei will come out, will go public. Rabbi Arizal says that this is also the concept of Ner Chanukah. We know that the candle that we use on Chanukah, the mitzvah min hamuvchar, the best way to perform that mitzvah is to use oil, olive oil. And we know the Gemara says in many places that oil represents seichel. The mind of a person is compared to a candle, ner elikim nishma sodom. The neshama, which represents the seichel of a person, is compared to a candle. Just as a candle uses oil to draw its nourishment to burn, so too shemen in general, oil, is symbolic of chachma, of seichel, wisdom. We know also that the concept of light, opening one's eyes, is also a concept of chachma and wisdom. The posek says about Odom and Chava, "Vatipokachno einei shnehem." Their eyes were pikeach, their eyes were smart, so that we see that light goes together with wisdom, chachma. To be enlightened means to be shown to receive a chachma, an understanding of a certain item. Therefore, Rabbi Arizal says that this concept of the shemen of Ner Chanukah represents the opening of one's eyes, just as we saw earlier that Shabbos, the Shin Bas, represents an opening of the eyes. Now we know that the Gemara says that the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, when does that mitzvah begin? The Gemara says that the Ner Chanukah is supposed to burn from the beginning of night ad shetichle regel min hashuk, until there are no more people walking outside. Meaning until it's very dark, where everybody's already in their homes, finished with their work outside. That's till when? That's the shear of Ner Chanukah. The wording in the Gemara is at shetichle regel min hashuk, until the foot is no longer outside, implying that people are inside of their homes. Rabbi Arizal says we see here also a connection between Ner Chanukah and the Tikkun of Emunah. We said earlier that the mitzvah of Emunah represents the feet of a person. The regel is Emunah, the foundation upon which the whole Torah stands on. When a person is Zoche, the accomplishment of Ner Chanukah is that Tichle regel min hashuk, that the regel which represents Emunah will not be on the outside, but rather it'll be on the inside. A person will be Zoche to bring the Emunah inside of themselves and bring it to a shleimus, bring it to a completion, and be Zoche, again, through this light of Chanukah, to see his true humbleness, to see how small he is, and to be Zoche to a tikkun of Emunah. These are the items that Rabbi Arizal presents in this chapter. Just to review in very short form, Rabbi Arizal said that the mitzvah of Shabbos, the Shin Bas, which corresponds to the eyes, Shabbos is mesugol. If a person respects Shabbos the right way, their eyes will be opened, especially to see how small they are and how great Hashem is, and that will help a person's emunah. A person will be zoche to emunah b'shleimus. That's what Shabbos can do, and so too Ner Chanukah, which represents light, wisdom. Wisdom is also a concept of opening the eyes. Vatipokachno einei shnehem. This light of Ner Chanukah, the Gemara teaches us that it burns ad shetichle regel min hashuk. That what does it accomplish? It brings the regel, the emunah, out of the shuk, the marketplace, which represents the place of tumah, the place of klipos, and it brings it inside. It brings the emunah inside the heart of a Jew, inside the mind of a Jew, and that's how a person could be zecher to all the brachos. As the posek says, ish emunais rav brachos. The next paragraph, Reish Samach Beis, 262, Rav Nosson writes, this item also I found in the notes of one of Rabbi Arizal's Talmidim. Rabbi Arizal said, you should know that there exists a certain type of chen, a certain type of charm, which a person that's zoche to have this chen is capable of making a shailas cholim, is capable of trying to receive information from Hashem in a dream, and being able to actually find out things that are going to take place in the future in their dreams. Rabbi Arizal says, we know that the Gemara tells us that certainly dreams are filled with asidus. Dreams many times portend the future. They tell a person what's in store for them in the future. However, one of the major problems with dreams are that they're a mixture of truth and untruth. The Gemara makes a statement, Kishem she'i efshel lebar b'loi teven, just as it's impossible to have grain without a klipa surrounding it, without a chaff, a psoiles on the outside, so too there's no such thing as a dream without psoiles, without waste matter, without silliness in it. So that it becomes a whole test for a person to be able to figure out what's psoiles, what's real and what's unreal within the dream, and to sort it out. However, Rabbi Arizal says we know there are times when a person has a dream that is clear. As the posek says, B'chaloim adaber boy. Hashem says, I speak to him in a dream. So there is a concept of Hashem communicating a message clearly in a dream also. And this chen, Rabbi Arizal says, a Jew that's zeicha to have this certain type of chen, that person's dreams are accurate. Not only are their dreams accurate, but even if somebody else will tell such a person a dream that they had, when this person who has this chen will hear the dream, immediately the sheker will fall away, and they'll be able to sort out clearly what's true in the dream and be able to interpret it for the person. Yosef HaTzadik is one who was zeicha to have this chen. We know the posek says when Yaakov Avinu was discussing the brothers in Parshas Vayechi, he said about his son Yosef HaTzadik, Ben Poiros Yosef, Ben Poiros Alei Oyin, that Yosef HaTzadik is one whom people look at when everybody looks at him in a favorable light. Everybody likes seeing him, meaning he had this special chen, this special charm upon him. Therefore, Rabbi Arizal says, his dreams were accurate. We know the Torah tells us that Yosef HaTzadik had dreams where he saw his brothers. He saw certain things bowing down to him, which represented his brothers and even his own father and mother bowing down to him, accepting his authority over them. Because he had this chen, he was able to be mishtamesh b'chaloim. He was able to receive communication from Hashem through dreams, and also as a result of that, he had the power to interpret dreams, whereby when Paroi presented his dream to Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef HaTzadik was able immediately to be able to sort out what was true and what wasn't true, and able to interpret the message that Hashem was sending to Paroi in his dream. There is just one short, interesting item I'd like to mention that our Rebbe Zechron Avrocha once told, which most people aren't aware of. That's something good to know about the dream of Paroi. The Torah says that Paroi first approached all of his magicians and stargazers and asked them to interpret his dream for him. They attempted to and failed. And thereupon, Paroi called on Yosef HaTzadik, and Yosef HaTzadik interpreted correctly. The question is, how did Paroi know that they were misinterpreting his dream? And the answer is that it's brought that Paroi wasn't a total idiot. He didn't want to take a chance of having anybody misinterpret his dream, and therefore when he told it to them, he included a lie in his dream. He told them, Vehine oimed al sfas hayoer, that I was standing at the edge of a river and I saw this vision. All the other magicians, when they heard this, not one of them corrected him. when he presented the dream to Yosef HaTzadik, the Torah says Yosef HaTzadik played back his dream for him. And when Yosef HaTzadik said it, he said, V'hinei oimed al hayoir. Paro was standing on the river. Yosef HaTzadik said to Paro, you ain't going to fool me. I know your dream. You weren't standing on the edge of any river. You were standing on the river itself, on the water in your dream. And this is one of the ways immediately that Yosef HaTzadik proved that he was above the other phonies and that he was able to provide the accurate interpretation of Paro's dream. Halavai, we should be zeicher